It begins with the glint of fire on a bronze blade. A hero stands before a dragon whose breath scorches the sky. The earth shakes beneath its coiled body as smoke wraps around them like a living shroud. The hero steps forward, heart pounding, not because he is fearless, but because the village behind him depends on something greater than fear. He raises the sword. The clash reverberates across the valley like a thunderbolt. Cut to a very different light. White, blinding, electric. A rocket ignites on a launch pad in Florida. The ground trembles again, this time under the force of physics rather than legend. Engineers monitor screens. Sensors flicker. A countdown echoes across a digital world that stretches far beyond the village of any one hero. As the rocket tears upward, leaving behind a plume of fire, we watch not just a machine ascending, but a human dream taking flight. Here, in the collision of the ancient and the modern, a question rises. Why do stories thousands of years old still feel familiar today? Why does the slaying of dragons echo inside a rocket launch? Why does Prometheus stealing fire from the gods feel strangely similar to a tech innovator pushing boundaries in a glass-walled lab? Across millennia, through science, industry, and reason, we never stopped returning to the old stories. They guide us, challenge us, haunt us. They whisper in our movies, show up in our advertising, illuminate our personal struggles. And in a world that prides itself on progress, here is the paradox we rarely admit. Our imaginations are still shaped by the oldest frameworks humanity ever created. We live in an age of satellites, quantum computers, and CRISPR gene editing. Yet our inner worlds still pulse with heroes, monsters, mentors, and quests. Our hearts still lean toward journeys, transformations, tests of courage. We scroll through stories all day and still hunger for the ones that echo something ancient and universal. Myth is not behind us. It's beside us. It's inside us. To understand why, we must begin with the simplest question. What exactly is a myth? A myth is not a lie. It's not a childish fantasy or a relic from an era before reason. It is a symbolic story that encodes meaning, values, and the deep structures of human experience. A myth is a vessel carrying the questions every generation has asked. What is the world? Who are we? Why does suffering exist? How should we live? How do we face the unknown? Before there were textbooks or peer-reviewed journals, before philosophy had formal schools or science had laboratories, humans turned to stories to map reality. Myth was our first psychology, helping us understand our fears and motivations. It was our first philosophy, offering explanations for purpose and morality. It was our first science, providing frameworks for why storms arrived, why seasons changed, why life and death danced in cycles. Ancient cultures across the planet, Greek, Norse, Egyptian, Chinese, Indian, African, Indigenous American, built intricate mythologies not because they lacked intelligence, but because they possessed a powerful intuitive wisdom. Humans understand the world through narrative. We don't store our deepest knowledge as equations. We store it as stories. And when you compare myths from far-flung civilizations, ones that never exchanged a single word, you begin to notice something remarkable. They share patterns, structures, emotional arcs, a sense that beneath the surface of each story lies a universal blueprint. This insight would eventually be crystallized by Joseph Campbell, who spent decades studying myths from every corner of the world. He found that the hero's journey, what he called the monomyth, appeared everywhere. A character begins in an ordinary world. A call to adventure arrives. A threshold must be crossed. Trials unfold. A mentor appears. A revelation shatters what the hero thought was true. A transformation follows. Then comes a return, not back to the same life, but back as someone new. It's not just the story of one hero, it's the shape of our lives. And, astonishingly, it's the shape our movies still follow today. To understand how deep this goes, travel with me for a moment to ancient Mesopotamia, to the world of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest surviving stories ever written. The tale unfolds like a shadowed dream of early civilization. Gilgamesh is a king, powerful and proud, half god and half human. His heart is restless. He rules with brilliance, but also with tyranny. The people cry out, and the gods respond by creating Enkidu, a wild man of the steppe, equal in strength but opposite in nature. When they finally meet, they clash like storm and stone, two forces testing each other's limits. But after their battle, something unexpected happens. They become friends. The wild man humanizes the king. The king gives purpose to the wild man. Together, they embark on daring quests, defeating monstrous guardians and challenging the boundaries set by gods. Each victory pushes them to believe they are invincible, until the day Enkidu falls ill and dies. Gilgamesh, shattered and terrified by the reality of death, sets out on a final journey. This time he is not seeking glory, but the secret of immortality. He crosses seas and deserts, challenges gods and fate, and reaches the eternal sage Utnapishtim. But the answer is devastating. Immortality is not for humans. Death is woven into the fabric of existence. Gilgamesh returns home not with eternal life, but with wisdom. He becomes a better king, a better human. His story, written over 4,000 years ago, still pulses with the same questions we ask today. What does it mean to be mortal? How do we face the limits of our power? How does loss shape who we become? Swap the clay tablets for a movie screen, and you could almost be watching a modern film. And that is no coincidence. The hero's journey, whether in Gilgamesh, Hercules, Odysseus, Arjuna, or Thor, mirrors the structure of Luke Skywalker discovering the Force, Harry Potter confronting his past, Frodo carrying the ring, or the protagonist of nearly every blockbuster that fills our theaters. These parallels are not laziness or repetition. They reflect something human, something archetypal. Stories resonate when they mirror the patterns we live internally: desire, fear, loss, discovery, transformation. Psychologically, myths speak the language of the unconscious. They dramatize what it feels like to confront anxiety, ambition, temptation, uncertainty. They give shape to the invisible. When a hero confronts a monster, it is often a metaphor for confronting the shadows within oneself, the impulses, fears, or traumas that threaten to consume us. Archetypes emerge across cultures, not because societies copied each other, but because humans everywhere share similar emotional landscapes. The mentor represents wisdom inherited across generations. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves we deny. The threshold represents change, those irreversible moments after which life will never be the same. The treasure represents growth, insight, or a new sense of purpose. These patterns are not merely narrative conveniences. They are psychological GPS systems built into the mind. Imagine a scene that collapses time. An ancient storyteller sits beside a hearth. Figures dance on the walls as flames flicker and wood crackles. Around him gather villagers, their faces illuminated in warm amber. The storyteller weaves a tale of gods and beasts, of heroes who venture into unknown realms. The listeners lean in because they hear echoes of their own fears and hopes within the mythic journey. Now jump thousands of years ahead to a modern film studio. A director sits in front of a glowing monitor. Digital shadows dance across the screen as CGI creatures take shape. The team debates how the protagonist should confront the final antagonist, how the emotional arc must rise and resolve, how the character's transformation must be earned. They are not copying ancient myths. They are rediscovering the same structural patterns because they reflect how humans naturally make sense of existence. Both the ancient storyteller and the modern filmmaker are working with the same raw material, the human condition. Technology changes, tools evolve, but inside we remain creatures of myth. This continuity explains why myths still appear everywhere, not just in blockbuster movies, but in video games where protagonists must level up, acquire allies, conquer challenges. In literature where characters confront inner demons. In branding where companies cast themselves as heroes battling a villain. Climate change, inefficiency, stagnation. In politics where leaders often frame themselves as saviors against looming catastrophe. In everyday life, where people describe their struggles as journeys or battles, complete with obstacles and revelations. We may no longer speak of dragons, but we still name our fears. We may no longer describe gods in temples, but we still elevate ideals and forces greater than ourselves. We may no longer sit around campfires to hear ancient epics, but we scroll through digital feeds searching for stories that help us understand who we are. Recognizing mythic patterns in modern life doesn't make them less meaningful. It makes them more powerful. Because once you see the structure, you can use it, personally, consciously, creatively. Imagine for a moment applying mythic understanding to your own journey. Every challenge you've ever faced, from heartbreak to ambition to self-doubt, has followed forms that humans have explored for thousands of years. You've met mentors who guided you, thresholds you feared to cross, shadows you avoided. You've gained insights at points of crisis. You've returned to old situations as a different person. This isn't metaphorical, it's real. Humans instinctively map their lives using narrative. And when we recognize that we're in a story, we can choose how we move through it. Knowing mythic structure can guide emotional understanding. When a difficult experience feels overwhelming, framing it as part of a larger arc lends perspective. When creativity feels blocked, archetypes can unlock imagination. When purpose feels elusive, studying ancient stories can reveal the universal patterns of meaning-making. Ask yourself simple questions that echo across mythic traditions. What is the threshold I'm afraid to cross? What inner dragon am I avoiding? Who plays the role of mentor in my life? What treasure am I seeking? What shadows am I ignoring? What part of my story is waiting to unfold? What truth must I face to grow? These aren't fictional prompts. They're tools. They work because they tap into structures older than civilization itself. The power of myth is not that it tells us what happened. The power is that it tells us what always happens. Across cultures, across centuries, across the entire human experience, myths illuminate what it means to live a life, to face uncertainty, to evolve, to understand just how far this influence reaches, and how it shapes everything from personal identity to cultural movements. We must journey deeper into the mythic mind. But we will continue that in the next section. Myth is often dismissed as something old, something primitive, something that belongs in dusty museums or the pages of textbooks. But look closely at modern culture and you'll see that myth never left. It merely changed its clothing. You can find it in a teenager immersed in a video game, embodying a character who must traverse a perilous world, acquiring tools, gaining allies, facing bosses that represent their own doubts and strengths. You can find it in millions of people lining up on opening night for a blockbuster film whose storyline mirrors journeys that were carved into stone thousands of years ago. You can even find it in the way brands present themselves, an underdog fighting an outdated industry, a visionary company disrupting the status quo, a product framed as a magical talisman that will unlock your potential. The mythic mind is alive, not because we deliberately preserve it, but because it mirrors the deep architecture of meaning-making. Every time we try to understand who we are and why our struggles matter, we reach, consciously or not, into mythic frameworks. Consider how frequently we describe personal challenges using narrative metaphors. A student aiming for a degree will say they're on a path or facing a hurdle. Someone dealing with heartbreak will describe it as a wound that needs wisdom to heal. Someone pursuing a dream will talk about being called or driven, as if by a force larger than themselves. These aren't coincidences. They're echoes of ancient patterns. We are narrative creatures navigating a world too vast and chaotic to fully grasp in raw data. Myth gives us a language sophisticated enough to capture the emotional texture of experience. Archetypes thrive because they reflect psychological truths. The mentor appears when we're teetering on uncertainty. The trickster shows up when life demands flexibility. The shadow emerges when something inside us needs to be acknowledged and integrated. Each archetype is not a character, but a facet of human nature. The mentor is the part of us that holds wisdom. The shadow is the part that holds fear, anger, and unprocessed pain. The hero is the part striving to grow. The threshold guardian is the part that tests commitment. The treasure is the insight that changes everything. These archetypes emerge again and again because they move in synchrony with human development. They show up in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, each time reshaped by circumstance. They help us interpret crossroads, failures, transformations. This is why ancient myths feel so modern. They were never about gods on mountaintops or monsters in caves. They were about us. When you recognize this, the world begins to look different. A startup founder fighting against an entrenched industry suddenly resembles Prometheus bringing fire to humanity, a figure taking a risk to deliver something transformative. A political movement positioning itself as a force for renewal echoes the archetype of rebirth found in countless myths. An athlete struggling through injury and rising again mirrors the death and return cycle found in Osiris, Dionysus, and countless hero epics. Even memes, quick, viral, humorous, carry mythic DNA. The trickster archetype thrives in modern internet culture. Pranks, reversals, inversions. These are echoes of Loki, Coyote, Hermes, and the countless shapeshifters who challenge rigidity with wit. Myth is not gone. Myth has gone digital. But myth is not only a cultural force, it's an internal compass. It also shapes how we understand tragedy and loss. Ancient myths grappled constantly with suffering. Their stories weren't escapist fantasies, but attempts to face the brutal realities of existence. Death, uncertainty, injustice, chaos. When we encounter personal hardship today, we often turn to stories that help us contextualize the pain. We look for meaning in adversity, for narrative arcs that reassure us suffering can lead to growth. This human instinct is visible in psychotherapy, where narrative reframing is a central tool. Patients are invited to see their experiences not as random misfortunes, but as chapters in a larger story. Trauma becomes the dragon slain. Recovery becomes a trek through a haunted forest toward clarity. Identity becomes something constructed, not imposed. Even neuroscience supports this idea. The brain stitches together memories in narrative sequences, searching for coherence. When neuroscientists look at how humans process experience, they find that storytelling regions of the brain light up, even when people think about their own lives. The mind narrates, it interprets, it mythologizes. And this is where myth becomes more than ancient history. It becomes a path toward deeper emotional understanding. Consider the moments when people feel stuck or lost. These moments often correspond to mythic thresholds. You stand before a door, knowing that crossing it will change your life. Ending a relationship, starting a new job, moving to a new city, confronting a long-avoided truth. The threshold is never comfortable. Heroes hesitate. So do we. When people face inner turmoil, a fear they can't shake, a habit they can't break, it often resembles meeting the shadow. Jung described the shadow not as an enemy, but as a part of the self that needs integration. Ancient myths personified these shadows as monsters, demons, tempters. They dramatized the internal battle so people could understand it, name it, and move through it. The mentors we admire today, teachers, friends, authors, thinkers, are embodiments of the archetype that guides us toward deeper wisdom, not because they're perfect, but because they provide tools for transformation. Every myth teaches something, not a literal lesson, but an emotional map. Facing fear brings growth. Companionship tempers pride. Sacrifice leads to renewal. Curiosity can defy the limits of fate. Wisdom is earned through suffering and reflection. These truths are as relevant to someone navigating modern anxieties as they were to someone standing beneath an ancient sky. To understand this more vividly, imagine another scene, one that blends ancient simplicity with modern complexity. A traveler emerges from a dense forest at twilight. In the distance, he sees a wide-open field shimmering under the last light of day. He has been walking for hours, guided only by instinct and a sense that something important lies ahead. As he reaches the field, a figure appears, an elderly woman with a staff, her face calm and knowing. She tells him that crossing the field will lead him toward the truth he seeks, but warns that he must leave something behind to continue. Now shift to a modern setting. A young woman sits alone in a cafe, staring at a job offer on her phone. It promises a future she always imagined: stability, recognition, new horizons. But taking it means leaving behind familiar ground, old friendships, and a version of herself she has outgrown. She feels both fear and excitement. She too stands on the edge of a threshold. She too must decide what to leave behind. Two scenes separated by centuries, one set in the mythic past, the other unfolding in the quiet hum of everyday life. But both characters face the same tension, the call to change. Myth shows us that this moment is ancient, that it is normal to hesitate before big decisions, that fear is not a sign to stop, but a signal of potential transformation. The story of humanity is the story of threshold after threshold. Our ancestors crossed oceans in fragile boats, ventured into deserts with nothing but stars to guide them, and carved meaning into the chaos of nature through ritual and narrative. Today we cross digital thresholds, scientific thresholds, psychological thresholds. But the emotional dimensions haven't changed. The ancient journey persists beneath every modern step. In this way, myth becomes a tool, a way of decoding life. When life feels directionless, studying the hero's journey can illuminate where you are in the arc. When inner conflicts feel overwhelming, the shadow archetype can help reveal what you're avoiding. When you feel isolated, remembering that every hero encounters a lonely road can ease the weight. When pursuing ambition feels impossible, stories of resilience from ancient myths can reignite commitment. Myth turns confusion into pattern, chaos into possibility. It sharpens creativity too. Writers, filmmakers, designers, entrepreneurs all draw from mythic structures to craft visions that resonate. When people say a story just works, it's often because it aligns with archetypal patterns the mind intuitively recognizes. And when a story feels disjointed or hollow, it's often because it lacks that deep structure. But perhaps the most important power of myth is the way it teaches us to see ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as participants in an ancient continuum of human experience. You have faced what countless humans have faced. Your fears are not new. Your aspirations echo the dreams of entire civilizations. Your quest for meaning is woven into the oldest stories ever told. Imagine for a moment that your life is not just a sequence of events, but a mythic narrative unfolding in real time. This doesn't mean elevating ordinary events into grand gestures. It means noticing the symbolic texture of everyday life. A difficult conversation becomes a test of courage. A creative project becomes a call to adventure. A failure becomes a descent into the underworld where insights hide. A reconciliation becomes a return with newfound wisdom. A new beginning becomes the crossing of a threshold. This way of seeing does not inflate life with fantasy. It clarifies life with perspective. Ancient people knew something we often forget. Myth does not compete with truth, it reveals it. In the modern age, we drown in information but starve for meaning. We have access to limitless knowledge and yet struggle to interpret our place in the universe. Technology accelerates our world, but it does not answer the deeper questions. Who am I? Why am I here? How do I navigate suffering, growth, identity? Myth steps into that void, not with literal explanations, but with symbolic maps. It teaches that life is not linear, but cyclical, that growth demands discomfort. The challenges are invitations, that wisdom must be earned, that we are part of something larger and older than we can fully comprehend. Myths remind us that the forces shaping our lives, love, fear, grief, ambition, uncertainty, are not failures of the human condition. They are the human condition. And when we stop seeing ourselves as isolated problems to solve and start seeing ourselves as travelers on an ancient path, something shifts. We become more resilient, more creative, more compassionate toward our own struggles, more attuned to the stories unfolding around us. This is why ancient narratives still resonate. Not because we're nostalgic, but because we're human. Not because myths are outdated, but because they are timeless. They evolved with us. They speak our psychological language. They whisper truths that modern life often drowns out. And perhaps the most beautiful insight is this. Our lives are not just shaped by myths. They contribute to them. Every time we overcome fear, we add another stroke to the archetype of courage. Every time we choose kindness over bitterness, we reinforce the mythic theme of compassion. Every time we transform through adversity, we echo the cycle of death and rebirth. Every time we mentor someone, we embody an archetype thousands of years old. We are participants in the great story of humanity. And one day, the stories we live may become the myths others inherit. So the next time you feel lost, ask yourself not, what's wrong with me? But where am I in the story? The next time you face a challenge, imagine the hero at the edge of the cave. The next time you discover an insight, picture the treasure in the hands of someone who has journeyed far. The next time you confront a difficult truth, imagine the shadow stepping into light. The power of myth is not that it belongs to the past. It is that it illuminates the present. Ancient fires have faded, but the stories they sparked burn on, carried within each of us, shaping how we love, how we hope, how we struggle, how we dream, and how we rise. Myth is not a relic. Myth is a guide, and the story